I think we are ready to begin. Before I introduce Dr. Gall, I've been requested to read some HASP course coordinator announcements. First and foremost, welcome. We are so happy to have you here. For those in the room, please take out your cell phones and ensure they are silenced so as not to distract from today's presentation. Also, welcome to the large crowd joining via Zoom in the HASP virtual classroom. A special thank you to our volunteer course technician, Amanda Root, who is a member of the Hope College Alumni and Family Engagement Team. If you have joined the HASP virtual classroom as a participant, you have the skills necessary to serve as a course technician, and you won't be alone. Congratulations. You will be teamed with an experienced course technician to learn the simple responsibilities of this important position. If interested, please contact, give an address. Are you receiving the weekly HASP happenings emails? These colorful and picture-filled emails are shared every Sunday morning and provide updates on the upcoming week's courses, special events, Hope College programs, and service opportunities, as well as important registration links. Make your HASP experience easy and find out what's happening. Visit the front desk today after class if you are not already receiving this information. Next, as we approach a new month, we are happy to invite you to our monthly program hosted this coming Tuesday at 9:30 at the Jack Miller Center for Musical Arts. The presentation is titled, Why We Need President Ford Today, presented by Gleaves Whitney, Executive Director of the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation. Coffee and cookies will be served beginning at 9 a.m. Bring a friend. We hope to see you there. One last reminder. Please hold your comments and questions until David or I can approach you with a microphone. This ensures our virtual learners and those connected with our in-class loop system can actively hear and participate in the conversation. Any questions or comments before we proceed? Now is my opportunity to introduce our speaker. Dr. Gall, you've been at Hope for how long? Since 2015?
Yep, I've been here since 2015.
Yeah, okay. You got your BA, MA, and PhD in psychology from the University of Iowa. Then you got a postdoc fellowship at Michigan State University in psychology and their neuroscience program. Which part of MSU was that? Was that the College of Human Medicine or?
Really, it was the Department of Psychology there.
Okay, very good. Your interests, as I've read, include an expertise in the influence of light on circadian rhythms. And today, you're speaking on sleep and mindfulness. And my guess, they interdigitate each other.
Absolutely, they do. Thank you so much, Dr. Dykstra. And I'm so happy to be here this morning to talk about sleep and mindfulness and the benefits that each provides. Let me start by saying that this is a really fun group for me to present to. I hope that at the end of this presentation, you come away with some tips and also consider getting as much sleep as possible. And I really want to highlight that because, I'm used to speaking with college students and trying to convince them to get as much sleep as possible. And one of the challenges that I've faced as a sleep researcher is convincing others that they should prioritize sleep. I can give literally hundreds or thousands of reasons why sleep is important, but for some reason, so many of us will prioritize other things over sleep. And it's really unfortunate because the many, many benefits of sleep will allow you to function better in your own life. So if we kind of flip the model and instead of thinking about how productive can we be, how much can we get done during the day, if we're able to first start by focusing on sleep, what time do we go to bed each night? Can we prioritize that? It will actually affect your life in such a way that you will flourish and you will prosper. Sometimes there's this misconception that we can be more productive if we just work. But if we don't take breaks, we're going to have a really hard time being productive and working at the highest efficiency possible. So some of my graduate training really was in understanding the development of sleep. And I used an animal model in graduate school. So I actually examined circadian rhythms and sleep patterns in rodents, specifically rats. And so I have pivoted some actually and focused more on humans recently in my research. It's required some collaborations with other faculty members in the psychology department here at Hope. And it's been really fun to really focus on humans. And so I'll talk about development.
it's
You'll
very
hear that
nice,
in my
but
talk
it's
today,
just
because I think it's important to consider any complex behavior like sleep and how it changes over time. I don't think that we can consider any complex behavior like sleep at any one point in time without thinking about how it changes, because it's constantly changing. You know that from day to day, your sleep patterns probably change. We would like for those sleep patterns to be very consistent, but sometimes they vary. And if we look over the lifespan, we see some really interesting patterns. So I want to kind of start there with these images that you see up here and kind of consider how sleep changes over the lifespan. And these first images that you see here on the far left are actually of my son, Oliver, who is now 5 years old. He's in kindergarten. The other images there of the adolescents and adults and older adults there are not individuals that I know, but I'm sure that as my kids develop, I'll take lots of pictures of them sleeping, because that's what sleep researchers do. I take lots of pictures of my kids sleeping, videos of my kids sleeping, and of course, I prioritize it in my own life and in my own kids' life, because I know how important and valuable it is. So we know that sleep is important across the lifespan, perhaps for different reasons. As we think about sleep in early development, in infancy, we need to consider some important elements that we know already about sleep, which is that actually infants sleep more than you'll ever sleep in the rest of your lifespans. Infants sleep a lot. That sleep tends to not all come at once, though, unfortunately for the parents, right? The sleep is somewhat fragmented in that babies are asleep and they're awake for a little bit, and then they're asleep for a while and they're awake for a while, but they sleep a lot. So we know that sleep is really important for development. And what's also interesting about infant sleep is that they don't have all of those extra elements that kind of interferes with sleep as we get older, right? As we get older, as we kind of think about adolescents, college students, adults, even individuals of your age, we have so many things that can interfere with our sleep. Infants don't really have as many elements that interfere. So that might be one reason why they get so much sleep. And it's prioritized and it's important for development. So I just want you to think about how the developmental trajectory of sleep changes over the lifespan. And it's really important to consider that, because depending on what age group we're focusing on, we might be thinking about different functions of sleep. So as I think about my son, who's now 5, right? We know that sleep is important for his own mood, his own mental state, his own happiness. For those reasons alone, right, we should be prioritizing sleep. For those reasons alone, but there's so many other reasons why we should be prioritizing sleep in ourselves and in our children. And so happiness, mood, certainly, mental state, absolutely. Sleep is important for those things. Sleep is also important so that we can maximize what we do during our waking hours, including eating. Believe it or not, it's important that we're prioritizing sleep so that we can be happy and functional during the day, and so that we can have that higher metabolic rate during the day while we're eating. If we're not prioritizing sleep, our circadian rhythms will be dampened, things will go awry, and it can result in weight gain and all kinds of other issues. We know that sleep is important for cognition, for learning, for our ability to function optimally And as I think about my son who's 5, he's learning how to read. If he wasn't getting enough sleep, he would have very challenging time learning things like how to read. I notice in him, actually, in the evening, sometimes I get home a little bit later than I want to at the end of a long day of work. And if I get home too late and we practice reading, he may get more frustrated. And that's because as he gets sleepy, he's not at his optimum level. So we need to be thinking about how sleep has so many important benefits, including also social behavior and the way that we interact with each other certainly is dependent upon how much sleep we get. So there's so many different benefits of sleep, and it depends upon the age that we're looking at. So as we think about kind of the things I would like to discuss today, I want to think about first circadian rhythms. As Dr. Dykstra mentioned, I'm very interested in light and circadian rhythms and how our rhythms are absolutely vital for our own behavior, including our sleep-wake behavior. So I want to start by thinking about circadian rhythms, consider the important role of development. I'll sprinkle that throughout the talk, and consider, why do we need sleep? Why is it so important? What are the benefits? And how can we best prepare our bodies for the sleep that we certainly need? To consider why sleep deprivation is so prevalent in our society. That's an unfortunate statistic. Sleep deprivation is very common, unfortunately, amongst many age groups, including adolescents, adults, and elderly individuals. So that's critical to recognize. Unfortunately, we're going in the wrong direction as a society in terms of how much sleep we're getting. And finally, to kind of tie this into some aspects of mindfulness, compassionate reappraisal, and forgiveness, and how those things might be related to sleep. So as we think about sleep over the lifespan, I just want to put this graphic up. Now, this particular image here is from a paper that was published in 1966. So quite a while ago in terms of when these data were collected, but these overall trends are consistent today with a couple interesting caveats. As we look over the lifespan, what we see is that the total amount of sleep that humans get decreases. So that's the general trend over the lifespan. You can see how infants spend about 16 hours asleep out of 24 hours. So that's incredible in and of itself. They're spending about 2/3 of their time asleep and about 1/3 awake. And that changes as we get into adulthood and older age, where sleep really is more about 1/3 of our total lives, right? But 1/3 of our lives are spent asleep should indicate to you that sleep is important. It's not something that should be neglected. It should be something that's prioritized. I should also mention here that some more recent studies have been done to look at this. And one trend overall is that the total amount of sleep that we're getting today is less than it was even in 1966. So as we move forward in time, the total amount of sleep that humans are getting is decreasing. This is not a good trend. And also, this is looking at how much sleep people are actually getting. We know that sleep need is actually generally higher than what people actually obtain. So we want to try to reach a higher amount of sleep so that we can meet sleep need so that it's prioritized. This is from a recent study from 2022 comparing human sleep over the lifespan to rat sleep over the lifespan. I mentioned that rodent sleep is something that I am particularly interested in as I studied it in graduate school. And you can see some clear commonalities here between humans and rats in terms of the fact that total sleep time does decrease over the lifespan. But notice that for rats, the total amount of sleep here is still substantially more than what adults will get. And why is that? Well, we could come up with lots of reasons, but perhaps one reason is rats just don't have as many things that that are on their mind or things that they have to do, right? They don't get as bombarded by all the things that they think that they have to do, most likely, whereas humans will instead say, I need to do all these other things, and they'll push sleep aside. We need to be thinking first about how to get the maximum amount of sleep and then plan our lives around that. So I mentioned circadian rhythms are important. Circadian rhythms are absolutely important, and we need to think about how can we allow for our circadian rhythms to be as well timed as possible. Your bodies need a form of predictability. Your bodies need a form of routine. Routine is good, especially when it comes to bedtime routines. One of the worst things that people can do is to move their bedtimes around from night to night, or have bedtimes that are specific to the week versus the weekend. You don't want to move your bedtimes around. It's super important that bedtime is consistent and that you're able to maximize the amount of sleep that you get so that you can meet your sleep need. So that's true at any age. And so circadian rhythms are daily predictable patterns of behavior. Sleep and wakefulness is an example of a behavior that follows a circadian rhythm. You should be awake for a certain amount of time during the day and asleep for a certain amount of time at night. And that pattern repeats each day. And interestingly, these circadian rhythms are influenced by external and internal factors. So light is one of those external factors that absolutely influences circadian rhythms in very powerful ways. And one of the things that we know based upon research is that if you're able to get lots of light during the day, and what I mean by lots of light is not this kind of artificial light that you're getting in this room. I'm talking about natural light. The more natural light you can get during the day, the more likely you will be sleepy at night and will be able to get more rest at night. But that also means shutting off screens at night. That also means turning off lights in your home at least an hour before bedtime. And so maximizing the amount of natural light during the day and minimizing the amount of artificial light at night is one way to help your circadian rhythms be well established, because external factors play a role, but we also have internal factors that allow for your circadian rhythms to be expressed. Specifically, there's a small region of the brain within an area called the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus in and of itself is not a particularly large area of the brain, but it's incredibly important for regulating your body rhythms, for regulating your body temperature. In some ways, the hypothalamus is also important for maintaining many aspects of life. It also controls the regulation of hormones. Hypothalamus is really important. Hypothalamus is quite small, though, and a smaller region within the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus is a particular part of the brain that allows for circadian rhythms to be expressed. It is sort of like a clock that resides within your brain, and I'll show you some data to support that. But as we think about your own rhythms, you need to be thinking about how your own behavior and physiology should be very predictable. In other words, bedtime should be around the same time each night. And that will result in, if you're maximizing the amount of sleep that you get, a wake time that is also most likely to be predictable. The only way we can do this, though, is to prioritize sleep, to have a set bedtime, to prepare your bodies for sleep, and also to get enough sleep so that you're not waking up too early to get to an appointment, right? We've all been there, right? Where we have things that we have to do at maybe 7 or 8 in the morning. But if we didn't get to bed early enough, we're sleepy, we're groggy, we're foggy, we're not able to function optimally. My graduate school advisor used to say that alarm clocks are evil. And in many ways, I think he was right. Because why? Because alarm clocks can wake us up at a point in our sleep cycle that is not optimal. That happens often. In other words, if the alarm clock goes off and we're in a state of non-rapid eye movement sleep, some form of deep sleep, you wake up and you're like, oh, that alarm clock, I feel terrible, right? Why is this alarm clock going off? And why do I feel so bad? Because your bodies will naturally wake up in the right sleep state. You should be waking up out of rapid eye movement sleep or REM sleep. Your bodies will naturally wake up out of REM sleep. And that's really important because REM sleep, if we look at brain activity during REM sleep, it is very closely associated with what we see during wakefulness. In fact, sleep researchers were really surprised when they first identified rapid eye movement sleep, because there were some things that they were really surprised about. One of the biggest things they were surprised about with REM sleep was that as they were looking at brain activity, they noticed that it looked virtually identical to the brain activity during wakefulness. Although the patient was completely asleep and atonic, meaning a lack of muscle tone. You could pick up the patient's arm and it would just flop down. So it was a paradox. Some people call REM sleep paradoxical sleep because it's really surprising that an individual could be in a state of sleep, but yet have brain activity that looks almost identical to wakefulness. But evolutionarily, this likely prepares your body for wakefulness. If you wake yourself up out of REM sleep, which is most likely what your body will do naturally, then you'll feel alert. You'll feel refreshed. Alarm clocks don't care what state of sleep you're in, right? They're waking you up at a certain time, doesn't matter what state of sleep you're in. And sometimes you might feel okay because probably you woke up out of REM sleep, and other times you're going to feel really bad because it woke you up out of a sleep state that was not optimal for being awake at that point in time. So you'll hit snooze and it becomes a vicious cycle because it's very difficult to get back into a state of REM sleep after you've hit snooze. So if you can ditch the alarm clock, do it, but it's not easy to do, right? Because a lot of times we have things that we've had sort of planned in the morning and we need that extra sense of security to wake up. I mean, full disclosure, I do use an alarm clock myself after saying all that, because I have class at 8:30 and I have to get up. And sometimes it is possible that my body is not waking itself up naturally at 6:15 in the morning to get my kids on the bus. So I understand that it's sort of a necessary evil. But if you're able to ditch the alarm clock, I actually think it can work. My graduate school advisor did actually ditch the alarm clock and was able to make it to all of his appointments. And as far as I know, he was never late to anything, because if he went to bed at the same time each night, he would get the sleep that he needed and knew that his body would naturally wake itself up when it needed to. You won't sleep more than you need to. So as you think about your own rhythms, think about the fact that you want to prioritize your bedtime to get the maximum amount of sleep so that you can be more productive during the day. We know that there are certain things that happen that are very rhythmic in one's life, including alertness. Alertness tends to actually be highest towards the late morning for most people. So not first thing in the morning, right? As you first wake up, you're kind of getting your bearings, but your alertness will kind of soar pretty quickly in the morning because levels of cortisol are also going up at that point in time. And then we sort of have a dip in the early afternoon for most people. We get a little bit sleepy. That usually happens after lunch. That's pretty typical. And then another sort of resurgence that happens at night in the evening, at a point in time where you might feel alert again prior to then feeling sleepy when you need to start preparing to go to bed. So circadian rhythms are just really important for allowing you to thrive. It's important for your own health because circadian rhythms absolutely guide our behavior, including sleep and wakefulness, but also our appetite, our cognitive performance, our attention level, the way that we socialize with others, our mood. These things are regulated by our internal clocks, and those internal clocks can be set by external factors, including light. Physiological circadian rhythms exist as well. Things like changes in metabolism, hormone production, including the release of melatonin, which I'll talk about in a second, and body temperature, just to name a few. If we're really honest about circadian rhythms, they really do influence everything that we do, including all of the cells in our body and the way in which physiologically those cells operate, but also that trickles down to our own behavior. We are rhythmic creatures because we have this area in our brain that allows us to be rhythmic, but we have to listen to our own body. As humans, we can ignore those cues that are so present and obvious, right? At night, we can get sleepy, melatonin levels start to rise, and we know it's probably time for bed. But yet we can push that aside and push through and do other things and put screens in front of our faces or turn on the lights and read a book. And what can happen is that we can miss that critical window for when we should fall asleep. And that can push our bedtime even later, and it becomes a spiraling kind of effect that then results in a sleep crisis or sleep deprivation. I think that Sarah Yang here, who is a contributor to WebMD, said it best, who said circadian rhythms are 24-hour biological cycles or clocks govern more than our waking and sleeping. Sometimes we think about circadian rhythms and sleep and wakefulness as being intertwined, and they are. But circadian rhythms also affect things that might surprise you, including the timing of when babies are born. Also, when we die, believe it or not, can be affected by our circadian rhythms. And of course, I think most importantly, how we pass the days in between, meaning literally everything we do is dependent upon these circadian rhythms. And so we should prioritize making sure that those rhythms are predictable so that can result in flourishing. A really cool experiment was done back in the 1960s in Germany. And at this point in time in the 1960s, we knew that circadian rhythms were likely important, but actually at that point in time, they actually didn't even know what part of the brain allowed for circadian rhythms to be expressed. And there were some really important questions that emerged from research that was done in Germany in the 1960s. And so to set this up, I want you to imagine yourself being a participant in this experiment. So this is an underground bunker in Germany. And participants were asked to spend weeks or even months in this bunker that has no windows. And these participants had no idea what time of day it actually was while they were in this bunker. So they had no indication of what was going on in the external world, right? This was before the days of cell phones, of course. And so these individuals were stripped of some of the things that might tell them time, like a watch. And they were placed in this bunker. And initially, the experimenters controlled the lighting situation. They turned the lights on when it was daytime, and they turned the lights off when it was nighttime, and that sort of mirrored what was going on in the external world. What was interesting about this experiment, though, is then they allowed the participants to turn the lights on or off whenever they wanted to. And so you might wonder, what would you do in that situation if you didn't know what was going on in the world around you and you could just turn the lights on and off whenever you wanted, sleep whenever you wanted, but you just had no idea what was going on in the world around you? Some might hypothesize that you would just sleep and wake randomly. You'd just sleep a little bit and you'd be awake for a while and sleep for a while and awake for a while, kind of like a baby does. That is not what happens. What actually happens is that we see the presence of circadian rhythms in a bunker without the presence of external cues, but those circadian rhythms are no longer timed to the external light-dark cycle. So in other words, we do have rhythms. It's just that those rhythms are no longer timed to the sun and the darkness. And so that means that we must have a brain area that allows us to have rhythms, because if we didn't how else would we know that, we should have these kind of well-timed rhythms? There are still clearly rhythms in people who do not have access to external cues, meaning we must have something going on in our brain that allows us to have rhythms. This individual here was a participant in the study who was kind of allowed out of the experiment at this point and is now kind of appreciating the presence of the sun, right? And, one thing that's interesting is that the researchers in the study tried to make the claim that these participants did not have any major impact on their mood. I find it hard to believe, honestly, because the way that they actually assessed mood was pretty rudimentary. They didn't do full-on assessments about mood, in my opinion. They were more interested in their kind of overall sleep-wake behavior and other physiological measures, including body temperature. We know that individuals who don't get enough exposure to natural light have a higher risk of depression. Like seasonal affective disorder is a good example of that. Seasonal affective disorder is related to not getting enough natural light, which happens in the winter in Michigan. In the winter, as you know, 70% of our days are cloudy, and cloudiness means less light availability. Also in the winter, we tend not to be outside as much because it's awful and snowy and cold and terrible, right? And so we spend more time indoors in the winter, and there's also less available light outside. And those conditions are unfortunately optimal for the progression of certain disorders like seasonal affective disorder. And so what we know now is that if an individual was in this bunker situation for long term, and if proper measurements were done, we would see effects on mood, absolutely. But these researchers tried to minimize that by saying, oh, these participants, when they came out of the study, they actually said, can I just stay in there longer because I loved it so much? And you have to question that, right? Why would that be the case? I actually dug into this a little bit more to try to understand this. And I went back to the original research. It was written in German. I don't speak German. And so I was a little bit stuck trying to understand this study. Actually, I reached out to one of the original researchers on the study, and I asked him some questions about it because I was curious about, were these participants paid for this work, for this research, for this participation? Were they paid? How were they paid? He claimed they were only paid a few dollars a day. Of course, again, this is back in the 1960s. They were paid minimally. And I did discover, though, that most of the participants were graduate students who were trying to finish their dissertation. And so they needed this quiet, extended period of time where they could just focus on writing. And that made a little bit more sense to me. I don't know how generalizable this study would be, especially in terms of mood and excitement for being in a bunker for a long period of time. But one thing that we did learn certainly is that when these individuals were in this bunker and they were without Zeitgebers. A Zeitgeber is a German term for time giver. In other words, there was nothing to indicate what time it was to these individuals. We do see the presence of rhythms, but we see that those circadian rhythms are free running, which means that you can see how normally our rhythms are well timed such that we are asleep at night and awake during the day for humans, right? But what happens in the bunker is that, yep, there are rhythms, but we don't see that those rhythms are timed any longer to the sun and the darkness. We see the presence of free running, which really just means that their circadian clock is about 25 hours long instead of 24. But either way, we know that there's presence of rhythms that exist even in the absence of external cues. And so we know that that brain region is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN. It is a component of the hypothalamus. And what we know about it is a lot of interesting things now that they didn't know in the 1960s. Really, this wasn't discovered until the 1970s, when researchers finally started to figure out, okay, what part of the brain is actually controlling these circadian rhythms? You can see how small the SCN is, that little The SCN is that little pink area that is a component of the hypothalamus. It's interesting because it's located just above the optic chiasm. The optic chiasm brings in visual information about light from the retina, from the eyes. And so it lies just above that. And so it's in a perfect position to receive information about light. And what happens in most of us, if we're exposed to light and darkness, is the SCN is capable of being entrained to the light-dark cycle. In other words, if we're exposed to lots of light during the day and darkness at night, the SCN will be regulated on a 24-hour cycle. But if we remove all of those cues, it operates closer to a 25-hour cycle. And this was known because in rodents, going back to some of the rat work that I'm interested in rodents, if the SCN is lesioned, as it is here with this arrow, we can see that behavior becomes arrhythmic. There's no longer presence of a rhythm anymore. So we know that there's a brain area that is devoted to maintaining circadian rhythms. You all have an intact SCN, presumably, because you're all here and you're alert and you're awake. If you didn't, you'd be falling asleep constantly and you wouldn't be able to function normally. And so with an intact SCN, we see the presence of rhythms. We're looking at here sleep-wake rhythms, but also temperature, body temperature rhythms. When the SCN is completely destroyed, as has been done experimentally in rodents, we see arrhythmia, the absence of rhythms in all facets. Sleep and wakefulness rhythms, hormonal rhythms, body temperature rhythms, they all disappear without having an intact SCN. And one of the hormones that's regulated by your SCN is melatonin. Melatonin is expressed at night and it rises pretty sharply as it starts to get dark. Melatonin helps to provide a cue to your bodies that it's time for bed and you start to get sleepy. You start to yawn, your body starts to feel tired. What's interesting about melatonin, unfortunately, I would say, is that melatonin is inhibited by light, meaning, I think about a lot about college students and how they often work late at night and use computers. Computer screens emit light, especially a lot of blue light, which can actually inhibit the release of melatonin, making your body less sleepy. And so we need to think about ways to maintain darkness better in the evening so that melatonin is possible of rising so that we can actually feel sleepy. If we surround ourselves by artificial light at night, we will not be as sleepy and melatonin will not be able to rise as it normally does. So that kind of indicates that external factors like light certainly influence the circadian rhythms that are present. So a lot of researchers, scientists, but also even teachers in everyday contexts are thinking about ways to allow people to get more exposure to natural light. On a sunny day, the amount of lux, that's how we measure the amount of light, might be 40,000 or more lux on a sunny day. On a cloudy day, it's probably closer to 10,000. Inside of a room like this, it's probably closer to 300. Okay, so even though you probably think, it's pretty bright in here, it's nothing compared to what it's like outside. And we know that there are a lot of advantages and benefits to getting natural light. So the more natural light you can get during the day, the better it will be to improve the amount of sleep that you get at night. So just to think about some ways in which you can maintain your circadian rhythms is to, of course, avoid light sources at night, especially overhead lighting and other forms of screen time, including phones, computers, tablets, and perhaps even televisions. Try to listen to your body's cues because we know that sleepiness is associated with the rise in melatonin. You should feel sleepy if you're surrounded by darkness in the evening. And instead of pushing through sleepiness, try to actually follow those body cues. Try to do your most arousing activities during the day when the sun is out. Try not to do exercise in the evening because Evening exercise can actually stimulate your brain, then making it harder for you to fall asleep. So you should be thinking about doing relaxing activities at night, preparing your body for rest, establishing a nightly routine, going to bed at the same time every night, including the weekends, and developing a very strict schedule before bed. There's some really interesting psychological benefits of having a very specific routine before you go to bed. That might be brushing your teeth, meditating, praying, taking a bath or a shower. If you do these kinds of things each night, what will actually happen is your SCN, your suprachiasmatic nucleus, will be able to recognize those cues. And it will help your body to know, oh, hey, okay, these are extra cues that allow me to know that it's time to go to sleep. So some of these routines that you might already do can actually help your own internal body clock to know that we're starting to get to the point where we're getting ready for bed. And instead of trying to do arousing activities in the evening, you want to think about doing things that are relaxing. Meditating, praying, relaxing, maybe listening to some soothing music. Whatever it is, try to make it a routine, try to make it a habit, because that can help your body with one of those external cues that is not going to be problematic, but is actually going to be helpful. As we think about biological rhythms in general over the lifespan, kind of coming back to this idea of development, one unfortunate thing is that as we age, our circadian rhythms just are not as strong as they once were. So young individuals, young adults have very strong circadian rhythms. If we look at the activity of the SCN, for example, the neural firing of the SCN tends to be stronger in younger adults than older adults, which is associated with rhythms that are dampened, meaning most likely older individuals have rhythms that are not as strong as younger individuals. So that's one thing that older individuals are fighting against. And that's just something that your body, unfortunately, is doing over time that we really can't change. But the more behavioral kinds of techniques that you can do to prepare your body for bed, the better. But certainly rhythms do change over the lifespan, much like the sleep-wake cycle changes over the lifespan. And we need to think about why circadian rhythms are so important. They are allowing your body to prepare for the expected changes in the environment. We don't want to fool your body by giving it artificial light at night. We want your body to understand that, okay, all of these different external cues align with one another. I wrote a review paper recently with a colleague, and we argue that the more stimuli that you can have that are well aligned with each other, the better. In other words, get lots of bright light during the day, do your activity, exercise, cognitive kinds of things during the day, but consider really finding ways to relax at night, because having circadian rhythms that are well entrained, in other words, well synchronized to the light-dark cycle, can lead to so many benefits, including higher productivity, right? A lot of people sometimes think that productivity is related just to hard work and how much time we spend doing things. That is not true. Productivity can come by emphasizing and prioritizing circadian rhythms and sleep. You will be more productive if you're well rested. If you're just pushing through and getting a couple hours of sleep per night and thinking, well, I spent 22 hours being productive, you're not going to be very productive, because the level of cognition that you have is going to suffer. So try to prioritize sleep so that your memory and cognitive function are improved. Your overall physical health will improve. Better metabolic function, improved mood, and positive impacts on all elements of your life happen when your circadian rhythms are well entrained. So this kind of gets me to think about then, well, in what ways then specifically does sleep help us? What are the benefits of sleep? And I will say that this question seems elementary. What is sleep? You probably all know what it is because you all do it. But actually, sleep is really, really hard to define. One of the better definitions is this one, but it has a lot of important elements embedded within it. Sleep is a natural periodic state, meaning it happens naturally within our own bodies, and it's a process that is dictated by a circadian clock. It's periodic, meaning it happens about once a day or once a night for humans, and it allows our mind and body to rest. But there's lots of caveats with any of these kinds of definitions. But our brains actually are not less active when we sleep. You might think that our brains just quiet down. That's actually not the case. Our brains are very active when we sleep, indicating that there must be some really important functions of sleep for our own brain and for our own body. So although, yeah, it is a state of rest, it's not as if your brain is less active. It's just that different parts of your brain become active so that it can help you in your own life. We know that if you're thinking about a lot of anxious thoughts, let's say, a lot of anxiety-provoking kind of thoughts happen maybe when you fall asleep, which is not good, right? This is why mindfulness can help, or prayer or meditation can help, because if you're falling asleep in an anxious state, a lot of times you'll end up dreaming about some of those anxiety-provoking things that you were thinking about. That can result in you waking up feeling stressed and less well-rested. So we need to find ways to rest our bodies before we fall asleep and try to avoid some of the negative thoughts that sometimes enter our minds before we fall asleep. The eyes are typically closed when we're asleep. There's a usually there, right? Your eyes are not always asleep, or your eyes are not always closed when you're sleeping. During REM sleep, your eyes can dart back and forth. Sometimes people can do things like sleepwalk, and in that case have their eyes open, but they still are in a state of subconsciousness. You're usually unconscious when you're sleeping, but there are a variety of kind of a spectrum of consciousness that we see during sleep. When you first fall asleep, your consciousness levels are lowered. As you get into deep sleep, your consciousness levels are very low, but actually there's a kind of a spectrum here of consciousness. And there's a decrease in bodily movement and responsiveness to external stimuli. You probably know that if someone were to shake you very heavily, you're probably likely to wake up. But if someone were to just lightly touch you when you're sleeping, you're less likely to wake up. So there's a lot of interesting things going on here with sleep. I want you to think about what are some of the important benefits of sleep. And so think about this question for a second. How much sleep do you get each night on average? So think about that. Hold that in your mind for a second. What is your average amount of sleep? Compare it to how much sleep that sleep researchers say you should be getting. And here, if we look at older adults, you should be getting at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. Some may need 9, and some may need a bit less, 5 or 6, but certainly no less than 5. If you're getting less than 5, that can really indicate that you're likely to have a lot of significant detriments to your own health if you're getting less than 5 hours of sleep. You're aiming for 7 to 8, but one thing that's interesting is that there are individual differences here. The best way to know how much sleep you really need is to try to find an extended period of time where you can actually prioritize the sleep that you're getting without appointments and other things that might get in the way, and then average that up. And that will tell you how much your body really needs. Your body won't get more than it needs or less than it needs unless there's some other underlying health issue. We know that things like depression can be associated with less overall activity and even too much sleep in certain cases. But if you're healthy overall, you're probably somewhere in the 7 to 8 hour range. And you notice that over the lifespan, the amount of sleep that we need does decrease, but it levels off pretty much from teenagers, sort of teenagers and young adults throughout older age. There's sometimes this misconception that older adults need less sleep, and that's not true. The truth is that it's just harder to get more sleep as you age because there are so many other external factors that can influence your ability to get enough of it. So there's a lot of interesting things to consider here in terms of the development of sleep. We know that if we look at the actual amount of sleep that older adults are getting, it's probably somewhere around 7 hours, even though the need is somewhere between 7 and 8. This was back in 1966. If we look at data from today, this kind of makes me sick, honestly, because you look at baby boomers and they're getting about 6.5 hours sleep on average by data that have been collected more recently. Notice that even over the lifespan, even our younger adults are not getting nearly enough, right? They're not even getting 7 hours. And if we look at the sleep need for them, it should be 8 to 10. This is scary. This should be alarming. I think about this often. We know that college students are not getting enough sleep either. In fact, we did a study recently looking at sleep in preschoolers, and you might think, well, preschoolers, why would they get less sleep, right? They're still at an age where they can prioritize sleep, and preschoolers should be getting about 10 to 13 hours of sleep. In our study, we found that they're getting closer to 9 or 9.5 hours of sleep. They're beneath the amount of sleep that they even need, meaning the sleep crisis could be starting as early as preschool years or maybe even earlier. We think this is because the expectations, the priorities that parents are placing on themselves can trickle down to their own children. Parents get home sometimes late at night. They're trying to get the dinner on the table. Preschoolers should be going to bed by 7:30 at night, but sometimes parents aren't even able to get food on the table until after that point in time. And so when adults and when parents don't get enough sleep, their own kids can also suffer from sleep deprivation. This is a major problem in our society. So as we think about how sleep works, one of the things that sleep researchers have known for a long time is that rapid eye movement sleep is particularly important for learning and memory, for feeling alert, for improving your mood. You need rapid eye movement sleep to do those kinds of things. And over the course of the night, we get more and more and more REM sleep, to the point where when we wake up, we should be waking up out of a REM sleep state. A lot of times you'll know that you woke up out of a REM sleep state really because of two reasons. One, you might remember dreams. So if you wake up and you feel like, I just woke up from a dream, that's a good thing, because that means that you woke up naturally out of REM sleep. REM sleep is more associated with vivid dreams. And so it makes sense that when we're dreaming and when we wake up out of that state, we're likely to remember those dreams and we're more alert. So dreaming is associated with REM sleep, absolutely. We get more REM sleep over the course of the night. One of the challenges for older adults, though, is that sleep tends to be more fragmented, meaning that as we age, it's harder to get consolidated bouts of sleep. And that's, again, for a variety of reasons. Some of it's due to the fact that our circadian rhythms are not as strong as they once were. Some of it's due to the fact that it's harder to control bladder movements, for example, and you wake up and you have to go to the bathroom multiple times during the night. The problem with fragmented sleep is that every time you wake up, it takes a significant amount of time to get back into rapid eye movement sleep, sometimes 90 minutes or more. So if you're waking up many times per night, it can mean that you don't get the REM sleep that you need. These are hard things to fix, by the way. I don't have all the answers on this, but I do know that rapid eye movement sleep is incredibly important. As we think about babies for a second, I just want you to think about the fact that circadian rhythms in babies develop over time, meaning that babies are not born with circadian rhythms that are well-timed. You probably know this too, because when babies are first born, they're not getting bouts of wakefulness during the day and sleep at night like parents would love them to do. It's very fragmented. They're getting lots of sleep. It's just coming kind of at the wrong time of the day and night. And that takes some time to consolidate. Then it becomes really nice and strong. As long as parents are prioritizing that for their kids, they're able to go to bed, sleep throughout the night, and do that up until a certain point when we get to adolescence, when everything seems to go a little bit wonky. I mentioned that we've done this study in preschoolers and looked at sleep patterns in them. We've used Fitbits and other kinds of ways to measure sleep in them. Preschoolers aren't getting enough sleep. This is a sad reality. Adolescents are not getting enough sleep either. There's an interesting thing that happens in adolescence where when we get to adolescence, they start to become late risers. They start to go to bed later and they want to wake up later as well. Young children actually tend to be early risers. And maybe that's because bedtime is prioritized for young children and they're able to get up on their own. Sometimes this can annoy parents where, young children may even wake up before their own parents do. We see that often. And then you get to adolescence and all of a sudden you can't get your kid up. And that is a natural process that happens. There are a lot of reasons for that. We sometimes call this the perfect storm that happens in adolescence. And then it's sort of this struggle throughout life to get back to being an early riser again, most likely because throughout life, we're just not prioritizing sleep as much as we should. And so we're always struggling to be able to wake up as early as we need to do. So it's a problem. As we think about older adults, compared to young adults, we see the predominant thing we see is fragmented sleep. So you can see these periods of wakefulness up here, boom, boom, boom. There's lots of periods of wakefulness that are often associated with older age. This can be wakefulness, by the way, that is more conscious, like you're awake and you have to go to the bathroom, or this can be periods of restlessness that maybe you're not even aware of. So we can use physiological measures to look at how much wakefulness people are getting. And we know that older adults are having more fragmented sleep and less REM sleep as well, because it's harder to get the REM sleep that you need if you're waking up many times per night. And so why is this happening? Oh, goodness, there's so many reasons, right? Physical health plays a role in fragmented sleep. Mental health plays a role in this, right? Anxiety, depression, these kinds of things are associated with changes in sleep patterns. Menopause can certainly affect sleep patterns. Absolutely. We know that there are some differences between sleep patterns in men versus women, especially those that are going through menopause, that can significantly result in fragmented sleep patterns. It can be harder to stay well rested. It can be harder to stay asleep. Females are also more likely to have a hard time sleeping in. Males are more likely to sleep in the morning. That can annoy and frustrate partners in some ways. Maybe you can relate to that. Medications also play a big role. This is a big one. As we think about all the medications that people are taking, a lot of those medications have side effects that affect sleep. That's challenging. There are lots of great things that happen due to medications, but there are also going to be side effects with literally every medication that is taken. And sometimes sleep is one of those side effects, unfortunately, and that becomes problematic for your own health. As individuals age, we know the SCN has weaker or more dampened rhythms. And as our rhythms are not as strong, the amount of melatonin that is being released is also reduced, meaning that it's less likely that you're going to feel sleepy at night if the melatonin doesn't rise as fast as you would hope. We also know that older individuals can tend to, as a whole, have poor sleep habits. But this is true, honestly, across the lifespan. Sleep environment is really important. You want to have a nice, cool environment that is dark, that does not have any noise. But that particular one happens really throughout the lifespan. And we also see older adults sometimes do not necessarily prioritize exercise. Some do, but we see some variety there. The less exercise that you get, the less likely your body is going to feel tired at night. So you want to prioritize exercise, but remember, try to do that in the morning so that it doesn't interfere with your ability to fall asleep. Social engagement can also be a benefit for your own mood, and social engagement can be helpful, again, as long as you're doing that during the day and getting lots of sunlight. But again, many times we see older individuals not getting as much sunlight, especially in the winter. And these can all be things that are associated with the reasons why sleep is more fragmented in older adults. We want to try to reverse that as much as possible so that we're not doing additional things to our body. We know that our body is already aging in and of itself, and there are certain things that we can't control, but many of these things we can control in certain ways, and we want to try to get a hold of that as much as possibly can. Stress and anxiety also plays a role, so we need to find ways to reduce that. Mindfulness can be a way to reduce stress and anxiety. And so if you're thinking about whether or not your own sleep patterns are normal or problematic, consider the fact that we know that older adult sleep patterns tend to be fragmented. It's not good that it's fragmented, but it's pretty normal for it to be fragmented. It's normal to be sleepy and to fall asleep earlier in the evening. And it's normal to sometimes struggle to be able to fall asleep. We call this sleep latency. It might take you a little bit longer to fall asleep than it did when you were younger. These are pretty normal things. Problematic things here include having significant trouble falling asleep, spending hours trying to fall asleep, which can be associated with insomnia, having significant trouble getting back to sleep when you're awakened. We know that awakenings happen. What you don't want to do is have those periods of awakening be too long, because then it can become very difficult to fall back asleep. If you feel terrible after a night of sleep, it's an indication that you're significantly sleep deprived. If you have a difficult time staying awake or concentrating during the day, or if you rely on sleep pills or alcohol to fall asleep, these are problems that we want to see if we can rectify behaviorally. And there are some ways that you can do that, right? By getting more natural light, by preparing your body for sleep, by not getting artificial light at night as examples. So I want you to be thinking about why you sleep. We all do it. What kinds of benefits does it provide to you? And remember that sleep will help you succeed in your own life. No matter what you want to be doing in your life, sleep is going to help with that. And really, it's all about the quality of sleep in many ways. What we're seeing with the research is that sleep quality is in many cases more important than sleep quantity. They are both important and they are intertwined, but sleep quality is especially important because improving the quality of sleep will improve your mood, your energy. You'll be less drowsy. You'll have improved cognition and better overall physical, emotional, social, mental health. And so we need to consider the ways in which you're able to focus on getting better quality of sleep so that you can live a longer life. Research has shown all of these things in terms of how sleep quality can affect all of these various elements of your life. Believe it or not, sleep deprivation is prevalent, but it's also known as a very well-known tactic for interrogation. You think about some of these things that we would never want to do to ourselves, right? We would never want, for example, to be in a position where we're highly stressed. We know waterboarding is incredibly, dangerous and detrimental. These are things that are techniques that are associated with ways to get people to sort of break. Sleep deprivation is one of these techniques that can allow people to finally crack, and yet we're putting ourselves in a position as a society where we're actually choosing in some ways to deprive our own selves of sleep. This is definitely true of younger adults, and extreme sleep deprivation can lead to hallucinations, psychosis, even effects that are similar to schizophrenia, not to mention disorderly and irrational statements and personality changes. So sleep deprivation is something we want to avoid, yet 71% of people just don't meet the recommended amount of sleep that they should be getting. And unfortunately, this is just true across most of the lifespan, except for infancy and early childhood, when the child is perhaps not as worried or focused on some of the other things that are going on in their life. 75%, 3/4 of people experience some form of sleep problems each week. And we know that sleep deprivation can have a wide range of negative effects on the body, including an increased risk of cancer. It can result in an increased risk of obesity, a weaker immune system, meaning you're more likely to be sick, an increased risk of heart disease, increased risk of blood pressure, increased risk of death. Why do we do this to ourselves? Is just a big question that I often ask myself. We should be prioritizing sleep so that we can avoid those negative effects of sleep deprivation. So as we think about sleep patterns and ways to improve, I've already mentioned a lot of these things, but just to kind of summarize some of them, we need to establish a nightly routine for yourself, or if you're a physician, considering that for that patient, to go to bed at the same time each night, to keep your bedroom dark, quiet, and cool, to limit light sources at least 1 hour before bedtime, to practice relaxation techniques, to avoid large meals and heavy exercise shortly before bedtime, to limit sleep pills if possible, or alcohol to fall asleep. And if you're wondering if you're getting enough of it, you should be recording your sleep pattern so that you have a sense of whether or not you're anywhere close to the recommended amount of sleep that you should be getting. So these are a lot of different things that you could be doing at night to help improve your sleep patterns. But there are things that you can do during the day as well, including getting lots of natural light during the day, getting out there and soaking in the sunshine can be very helpful. Even getting out there on cloudy days can be better than being inside. Avoiding caffeine, alcohol, and nicotine. If you're drinking caffeine, do so in the morning. Try to avoid doing that in the afternoon, because if you drink caffeine in the afternoon, the half-life of caffeine is such that it will still be in your system when you're trying to fall asleep, which can impair your ability to fall asleep. Naps are an interesting one. We could talk about naps at length. My opinion about naps is that if you're getting enough sleep at night, you probably don't need a nap. But if you're not able to get the amount of sleep that you need at night, naps can be helpful. But naps are tricky because if a nap is such that you've used an alarm clock to wake yourself up from the nap, then you can actually feel worse after you took the nap because you woke yourself up out of the wrong sleep state. So naps need to be either really short so that you're in sort of non-REM stage 1 or 2. An early stage of non-REM won't make you feel groggy, but if you wait a while, if you take a nap and it's an hour or a little over an hour, you're likely to be in a deep sleep. And in that case, you're going to feel worse than when you started. So either your nap needs to be really short, or it needs to be long enough so that you enter a REM sleep stage. Generally, your body, if you're taking a nap, will wake itself up out of REM and be in the appropriate stage of sleep. So if you're taking a nap, you don't want to use an alarm clock. Your circadian rhythms are timed such that you're very unlikely to take a nap and just sleep for the rest of the night, right? Unless you're so sleep deprived that you needed it. So naps are tricky, but they can be helpful if you're not getting enough sleep at night. Exercising is good for your ability to prioritize sleep. Exercising early in the day is better than exercising later in the day. And try to keep your brain mentally stimulated during the day so that you'll feel more tired at night. So I know these are a lot of things to keep in mind, but even if you pick a few, it can really help your body get more sleep. Even if your body you feel like you've tried certain things and it hasn't worked, try different ones and see what works for you. You want to use your bed for sleeping. This is especially true for young adults who sometimes do their homework in bed. And when we associate arousal with our bed, then psychologically it's harder to actually sleep in that bed. If you're using your bed just for sleep, then your body, it's another cue to your body that, I'm in a position now where I can fall asleep. I want to talk a little bit about mindfulness and then take your questions. To consider mindfulness, let me define it for you in a couple of different ways. And then I want you to think about how mindfulness can be beneficial. Mindfulness is defined as a mental state achieved by focusing on one's awareness on the present moment. Okay, so it's all about really being less distracted by really being in the moment, focusing on how you're feeling in that moment, and just taking a break from all the things that you're doing during the day. Right. You think about how busy we are as a society. We probably don't take a lot of time to sit and think about how we're actually feeling and, what our bodies are actually telling us. This is a moment in time where we can do that. And it's a point in time in which you may be meditating, you may be praying. It is a point in time where you're not judging yourself for the thoughts that you have. You're just focusing on those thoughts that you're having. You're focusing on your own body. And there are a number of ways that you can engage in mindfulness. There are lots of different techniques, including various breathing methods, guided imagery, and even prayer is a form of mindfulness, because it's a point in time where you are really you're having a communication with God. You're speaking with God in that moment. You are, instead of being distracted by everything that's happening in the world around you, you're taking that time to really think about how you're feeling and how God can help you in your life. That is a form of mindfulness. And we know, this is the cool thing, research has shown that mindfulness is beneficial. Prayer is beneficial for your own health. This is something I would love to come back and talk about sometime, about how faith and science can work together and that they're not necessarily separate entities. So if you're not mindful, you're much more likely to be distracted. Okay, 47% of the time, about half of the time, American adults are not even paying attention to what they're doing. And that can lead to significant unhappiness. We are a distracted society, and so mindfulness can help us to, at least for the moment, not be distracted. We also know that if you're not practicing mindfulness techniques, that's associated with loneliness. 3/4 of middle-aged Americans report moderate to high levels of loneliness. Whoa, that's shocking, because loneliness is associated with early mortality, poor sleep quality, negative self-talk, and depression. Loneliness is something that's starting to become at the forefront, by the way. I'm reviewing a paper right now about the effects of loneliness that were associated with COVID, and how that actually has a very significant impact on sleep quality. And when sleep quality is compromised due to loneliness, now all of a sudden it impacts every facet of one's life. And so really meditating, being mindful of the good things in your life, the things perhaps that God has given you, these are going to allow you then to have a more positive self-talk so that you're not always dwelling on the negative things. And if you're not mindful, we can just be walking throughout life and not thinking about why we're even here. What is our sense of purpose? What is our sense of meaning? We know that people with a low purpose in life are over twice as likely to die within 5 years as those with higher levels of purpose. We need purpose in our lives, right? We need to have a direction. We need to know why we're here. And I do think that prayer can help with that too, so that you have a sense of what God is calling you to do. So I think that in many ways, prayer can help with all of these different things. And so we need to consider that in order to be mindfulness, you have to be aware of yourself. So you have to be paying attention to your environment, to the good things in your life. You want to avoid distraction. You want to be connected with others. And this is where social isolation can be such a problem, right? You want to be well connected with others, because being well connected with others can give us some sense of purpose, right? When we're connected with others, we feel like we're giving to society. We're here for a reason, and those nurturing relationships can actually be very beneficial. And we also need to recognize that in order to be mindful, you need to provide your body with some kind of insight, right? As we are aware of our own selves, as we're connected with others, but also we start to realize our purpose, we really start to understand why we're here, why we're, what our purpose is on this earth. And that will lead us in a particular direction. It will allow us to have goals. It will allow us then to feel more positive and to work towards something which can be really helpful for your own health. And so one way that we actually tested mindfulness, this was a collaboration between myself and Dr. Charlotte Whitvliet. She is a professor here in the psychology department. She works in the same department as I do. And I mentioned that I'm a rat guy and she's a human researcher. And so we came together and asked the question, could we experimentally induce a state of mindfulness without calling it that? And could that then impact one's sleep patterns? And so the short answer, which is really cool, this is brand new research. In fact, this article, it just got accepted. So it's not quite out for you to read yet, but it will be soon. This was published or will be published very soon in Frontiers in Psychology. Some of the things that we found include compassionate reappraisal, which is a form of mindfulness, was associated with higher empathy, forgiveness, more positive and social responses, and less negative emotion. So you might wonder, what is compassionate reappraisal? And I'll show you how we induce that state in just a second, but you can see some of the positive benefits of compassionate reappraisal as compared to what we call rumination. Rumination is a state in which we ruminate or think about sort of more negative states and we dwell in that. And that's what we don't want to do. We do not want to dwell in the negative, and we want to think about ways that we can sort of consider the more positive aspects of things, even those things that we consider traumatic events in our lives. We can consider ways that we can forgive, and we can think about some more positive impacts of even those negative and traumatic events in our life. Interestingly, the morning after participants engaged in compassionate reappraisal, they reported less rumination, they were less angry, and the impact of the offense, those participants said was reduced, but also they felt more accountable to others, they had higher well-being overall, and most importantly for me, they had better sleep. So in what ways? Well, if you consider yourself in this experiment, imagine that you were asked to do this, right? And we did this with participants who were college students here at Hope College. These are psychology students at Hope College who participated in this experiment. Actually, this experiment was done fully online during COVID when we couldn't actually physically interact with our participants. And so we delivered these instructions online, and we asked participants on the first night to, for the next 2 minutes, think of the person you blame for hurting, offending, or wronging you. You can imagine, if you're thinking about a person who offended you, hurt you, or wronged you, that would stir up feelings of anger. Think about the ways that this offense harmed you when it happened. How does it continue to negatively affect you, right? These are ways in which we are perpetuating rumination. Focus on the negative thoughts, feelings, and physical responses you have. Now, as you can imagine, doing this is not going to be good for your own health. And we compared that to the next night, where we asked them to think about the exact same person, right? But think about that offender as a human being whose behavior shows that that person's need to experience a positive transformation or healing. Try to give a gift of mercy and genuinely wish that person well. During your imagery, actively focus on the thoughts, feelings, and physical responses you have as you cultivate compassion, kindness, mercy for this person. That is mindfulness. Actively focus on the thoughts, feelings, and physical responses you have as you cultivate positive forms of emotions for a person that hurt you. And what we found was some interesting things. To begin with, if you just are a more forgiving person in your own life, we call this trait forgiveness. You just possess this trait in your life. You're a forgiving person in general. People who are more forgiving are less likely to be ruminating in their lives, and less rumination in one's life means that generally you have a form of negative affect that is lessened. Meaning, if you are not likely to ruminate in your life, then you're not as likely to have some negative feelings, not as likely, right? And what we find is that people who are more forgiving in general, that possess forgiveness as a trait, will ultimately have higher sleep quality through reduced rumination and reduced negative affect. But interestingly, for this particular experiment, which is a very acute kind of an experiment, right? We're asked participants to ruminate for one night and engage in compassionate reappraisal another night. What we find is that across the board, these p-values are all less than 0.05, which means they're significant effects, that those individuals who engage in compassionate reappraisal will start to write about things that are more related to forgiveness, positive emotions. They're less likely to have negative emotions. They're more likely to have some kind of social language as they're writing. And they're less likely to be angry. They're more likely to have sort of positive feelings overall. And importantly, even they are more likely to feel a sense of forgiveness. Compassionate reappraisal or mindfulness can result in an overall feeling of forgiveness and positive affect. Just one night of engaging in this kind of mindfulness technique. As if we look at sleep variables, it's really interesting. Some of these effects are not significant, and most of those are actually related to forms of sleep quantity or subjective sleep quality. The main effects we see are actually on some effects of sleep onset latency and sleep disturbances. What we mean there is that when individuals engage in compassionate reappraisal, they fall asleep faster and they're less likely to have disturbances in their sleep, meaning we should be engaging in mindfulness because that will affect our sleep quality, which will in turn affect our own health. And so just to look at that graphically, you can see how individuals who engage in compassionate reappraisal were able to fall asleep faster and had fewer sleep disturbances than the same individual the night before who engaged in rumination. And so as we think about the importance of circadian rhythms, sleep, and mindfulness as a whole, I hope that I've convinced you that circadian rhythms and sleep and mindfulness are all important for your own health, but the only way we can achieve these things is to actively practice so that your body is capable of reaping those benefits. You can't just hope that you'll get enough sleep. It takes a lot more than that. We have to be very much engaged in this process so that you can really flourish in your own life. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that I've helped to sort of inspire you to sleep more, and I appreciate the time that you've taken to listen today. I'd be happy to answer.
I do have a question. Great discussion, and I'm hoping to practice some of this because I struggle with sleep. I have a question. If I'm in bed for 10 hours, but sleep for 6, and you get rest for the 4 hours, is that beneficial at all?
So, if honestly, the more time you spend in bed, the more likely you'll get rest, right? So as we age, it's just harder to get the amount of sleep that we really need. So the short answer there is it's good that you're prioritizing time in bed. It just turns out that as we age, it's harder to get all of the rest that we need when we're in bed. So it is beneficial, yes, to be in bed for as long as you possibly can, because that will help you maximize the sleep that you're able to get. Yeah.
You had said something about you won't get more sleep than you need to, which is interesting with that last question. But I had seen something or heard something, maybe a TED talk about Alzheimer's connected to sleep and a gland in the brain that only flushes during REM sleep. And it creates a cycle where if you don't get good REM sleep, it won't flush
Mhm.
and makes it more difficult to sleep. And so I'm wondering if you've done any kind of study or work on that phenomena, and does it have anything to do with why it's harder for older individuals to get sleep?
Right. That's a great question. I have not done research in that area, but I will say that there is a lot of research that's done looking at Alzheimer's patients and the benefits of sleep, because patients with Alzheimer's, as that disease progresses, their cognitive impairments really climbs. And oftentimes that's associated with sleep impairments as well. And so what we know about Alzheimer's and sleep is that, yeah, a lot of Alzheimer's patients struggle with sleep for a variety of reasons. And so there's a lot of research out there now that's looking at how can we try to prioritize sleep for those individuals. But with any of these kinds of illnesses, physical illnesses, it becomes increasingly difficult to be able to prioritize that sleep because our own bodies are kind of fighting against it in a way, unfortunately. So researchers are trying to find behavioral techniques for helping patients like Alzheimer's patients get more sleep, which can help slow the progression of the disease. But it's certainly a challenge because with any physical illness, that increases the likelihood that they won't be able to get the sleep that they need. So it's a challenge that researchers are trying to understand.
Yes, Jennifer online said there used to be talk about changing school schedules to accommodate children's sleep rhythms,
Mhm.
having elementary age children start school earlier and adolescents later. But it was always overruled by adolescent athletic practice schedules and after school jobs. Can you speak into that?
Absolutely. So the research is clear on this one. We should be starting school later than what we're starting it. The research is clear. Researchers have actually looked at this in Seattle and other places, and they've done an experiment where they've pushed school start times out by about an hour. The benefits were incredible, including increased academic performance in the kids, but also positive mood changes, more socialization, better cognition, better learning. So the research is clear. We are starting school too early for these kids. And as I mentioned, with adolescents, there's this perfect storm happening where, kids are expected to do a lot more in terms of athletics and homework and socialization. There's a lot happening during adolescence. And during that point in time, what do? We start school earlier. It makes no sense. So one of the things that I would like to do is to try to convince school boards in this area to start school later because the benefits are huge. I know that athletics are important, and I know that timing of buses and things are important, but honestly, what's more important than our own kids' health and learning environment and ability to have, excellent or better physical and mental and cognitive and emotional and social health? There's really nothing that trumps that, in my opinion. So I am an active proponent for later school start times. It's backwards the way we have it. My kids in elementary start at 8:30. My kids in middle school start at 7:30. That's completely backwards. It should be completely flipped because little kids are already up anyway. They might as well go to school at 7:30. And the older kids, there's so many different changes that are happening there, including hormonal changes that don't allow them to get up early. So they feel tired and yet they're going to school earlier. So it's a problem. I think that we'll eventually get there with society, but we're not there yet. This also relates to daylight saving time. What a mess, by the way. For circadian researchers, it's an absolute disaster. When we change our clocks like that, our own circadian rhythms have to adjust. It stinks. Actually, one of the things that a lot of people are thinking about in Congress even is getting rid of daylight saving time. But they've made one little mistake, which is that we really should be staying on standard time, because standard time is better associated with the light dark cycle. And what they want to do is keep us on daylight saving time so that we can maximize the amount of light that we have during the day. But it turns out that standard time is better for our own rhythms. So a lot of times this comes back to education that needs to happen, better communication between the scientists and policymakers, including school boards. These kinds of conversations need to continue so that we can improve the way that sleep patterns occur in society. So it's such a good question. I'm very passionate about it, as you can tell.
We have one more online. Ben said he tends to sleep better in a cold room. Is
Yes.
there science to support this?
There absolutely is, because at night our body temperatures tend actually to dip, and as they do, you want to keep your own home temperature low as well to better align with the home temperature. So in other words, it's great to actually keep a cool environment at night, because it's another one of these external factors, temperature, that can help align our own body rhythms. You want to have a nice warm environment during the day when your body temperature is high, and you want a cooler environment at night when your own body temperature is low. If you don't do that, let's say you keep your home temperature warm all the time, including at night, now all of a sudden the temperature of your home doesn't provide any cue for you, and that warm environment at night can interfere with your body trying to get to a lower temperature. And so having warmer temperatures at night can be problematic. You really want a cool environment at night that provides that additional cue for your own body's circadian rhythms. Sure.
If I only have one question, I'll ask you this one.
Okay.
I have met some people who have spent much of their adult lives working the night shift.
All right.
How do these people adjust? How do they react to cognition, to socialization? How does that affect their lives?
Such a great question. And there are a lot of things I can say about night shift workers. First of all, we absolutely appreciate night shift workers because it's important that someone is there for those jobs where we need them at night. Healthcare workers, for example, that doesn't turn off, right? So we need night shift workers in certain cases. In other cases where maybe that particular job doesn't necessitate a night shift worker, we should eliminate those, because there are costs associated with night shift work. And one of the things that we know based upon the research is that the best way to cope with those costs for night shift workers is to have a predictable schedule such that if they are working at night, let's say from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., that they sleep then during the day, and that continues on the weekends as well. This is a challenge for many night shift workers, though, because if they on the weekends are sleeping during the day and they're awake at night, they're probably not awake at the time that their family members and friends are. So they have an issue then with socialization that can lead to loneliness, and that's problematic. So what I can say really is night shift workers, really any way you slice it, will have significant costs to their health. But the research is pretty clear that having a routine and very specific sleep-wake cycle that is the same each night will minimize those costs. And one thing that healthcare has done in terms of policy shifts recently, which is a good thing, is that it used to be that many healthcare workers would work first shift for a few weeks and then move to second shift and then third shift and then rotate back to first. And I get why they were thinking that that might be beneficial, because then they would say, well, look, you don't have to work night shift as often. But honestly, that's the absolute worst thing you can do for someone's circadian rhythm, because they're constantly trying to readjust. And by the time they finally readjust, now you switch their schedule again. No, that doesn't work well. So having someone who is a dedicated night shift worker who is committed to that and has a strict sleep-wake cycle that is consistent is the best way to overcome that. But we do know, unfortunately, that there are major costs associated with it, including an increased risk of breast cancer in nurses who work third shift. That has been shown time and time again. There are costs, but we have to recognize that if someone is doing night shift work, that night shift work needs to be essential. We should not have night shift workers, doing things that we don't consider essential, because the costs are great. Yeah, such a great question. These are awesome questions. Love it.
Thank you, Dr. Gall.
Yeah, thank you so much.